let's start with overwhelm. I think for sensitives, those of us who identify as strong in feeling in the world, strong in awareness, intuition, it's a little different for everybody. Not everybody who would see themselves as a sensitive person would describe the same traits, the same experiences, perhaps even the same beliefs. But there is a through line, which is those who are in touch with their sensitivity, and maybe you became in touch with your sensitivity after a long, hard battle to get back to yourself. I know that was the truth for me. I definitely covered mine up and tried to outrun mine or escape mine through my childhood, and then had to recover myself from the age of 19 onwards. So many of you may have had a similar journey with that. But it's an interesting time to be alive because the Z's have said more people are getting in touch with their sensitivity than ever before. But what's happening is the levels of emotion in the world are rising. So they are facilitating this connection to sensitivity. But if you think about emotions that don't have a great deal of emotional awareness. So for example, I can think of times in my past where I got triggered by things and I acted from my emotions because of my trigger that I hadn't really processed. Something upset me or someone upset me and I reacted either at them or at the situation, or I turned it against myself. I didn't quite know what to do with the feeling, so I blamed myself, judged myself, harmed myself, either through action or through thought. So this level of emotion is what I would call the more reactive level. We haven't yet developed an emotional awareness. We haven't yet developed our emotional intelligence. We haven't got to the point where we go, oh yeah, I was abandoned in my childhood, so I've now learned that my wound of abandonment has shown up in many different ways in my life. And because I have learned that this wound of abandonment keeps replaying, and I have given it some time and some investigation, and I've done some healing work around it, I'm less triggerable when I next feel abandonment. Instead of trying to hold on to the person I think is abandoning me, or berating them for abandoning me, I've now got the capacity to go, oh wow, here's this feeling, here's this uncomfortable feeling in my body. So I'm going to work with this a little bit and I'm going to see this differently, and this is an opportunity for me to just slightly move the needle each time on this repetitive theme in my life, this repetitive lesson. And I'm going to be able to manage myself differently this time. The reason I'm bringing this up is at the moment we are seeing the level of emotion rise in the world, but it's not necessarily in a skilled way. It's not necessarily that the person who you're seeing reacting in the world in a big way has figured out why they're reacting. They're just lashing out, or they're retreating. They're running away and hiding. You know, one of the things about the suicide statistics at the moment is the heartbreaking thing about it is usually the person who has decided to take their life has been experiencing a deep sense of loneliness and isolation that they either haven't been communicating to the people around them because they don't think they can, or they don't think there's support for them, or they literally have become more and more isolated in their life. And oftentimes they may be creating that isolation for themselves. But the reason I'm bringing all of this up is the overwhelm that many of us can feel at the moment is not necessarily just our own. I don't know about you, but I notice myself having strong either mirror reactions or empathy or feeling walloped by certain things that are going on in the world where levels of emotion are high, either because someone's suffering or someone lashed out in pain. So the reason I'm bringing this up is just to remind you, and this is something that they're kind of talking to me about today and preparing me for delivering it with all of you. As a sensitive person, and again, you may go, well, I don't know if I'm sensitive, but if you're here, you're probably curious about your sensitivity at the very least. As a sensitive person at the moment, you've got your own sensitivity to deal with, and then you've got the reactivity of the world, and how different that is these days, because we are seeing more and more people having to get in touch with their discomfort about life. I'm not just speaking about our discomfort about life, you know, the thoughts and feelings we might have where we're like, what the hell is going on? You know, this is really that I signed up for this. I'm talking about that level of thought and feeling that is going around our collective now in a way that it wasn't 10 years ago. So on the one hand, we have a lot more awareness within our culture than I remember us having, even 10 years ago, but certainly 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Emotional awareness, self-awareness, mindfulness, knowing how to work with and regulate your nervous system. Even the name sensitive person, that term, I don't remember that being around 30 years ago. So the good news is we have a lot more tools out there right now. But the other side of it is, yes, there are more tools and more awareness, but because of the nature of these very transformational and somewhat difficult times, and even if you're someone who's loving this, you know, you're like, I'm having the most alive time of my life and this is the period that I signed up for, that's great. I'm not asking you to leave that state of being. I'm more talking to you about what's going on in the energy ocean around you. And just being aware that that level of emotion is up. It's in the room. And it's not always going to be well organized. It's not always going to be well thought through. There are going to be jagged missteps and incidents and mistakes that are going to play out. So I wanted to bring your attention and our attention to the overwhelm that we're feeling that is beyond the personal. As a sensitive person, part of your overwhelm right now is going to stem from feeling overwhelm in the world. If you've been around me for a while, you'll have heard me say this before, and you may have heard other people talking about this out in the world. That thing that we can do as empaths or sensitive people as an unconscious pattern. And this is something I certainly did when I was younger, and I'm sure there were other people doing it around me, whether I noticed them doing it or not. Trying to caretake the feelings of others or uplift the feelings of others so that you felt comfortable being in the room. So many of us can be uncomfortable in group gatherings. It's quite human, actually, and I think in this society that we're in today and the way that our society is organized, generally if you throw 50 of us into a room together for something with not much of a focus or a reason as to why we're there, there's often this slight discomfort that we feel when we're first there. Well, how do we all interact? Why are we here? What are the rules? What's the social glue for this? That's how so many of us have been trained and raised, and that's very much in our culture. But if you're a sensitive person or an empath, it might be that for you to not feel uncomfortable in a room, early on you got into the habit of going, oh, yes, so long as I make mum laugh 4 times a day, if I make my mum laugh 4 times a day, she's not probably going to be as violent with her words, or she's maybe not going to be as depressed and take it out on me. I'll start modifying myself and start working with what's in the room as a compensation in order to try and create a nicer room. I'm not saying that was a conscious thought. I'm not saying as kids we go, oh, I'm going to make the room nicer and I'm going to... But we all learn in response to energetics. We all learn to dance with the energy in a room. And the energy, certainly back when, if you're from my generation, I'm 45 now, it wasn't really spoken about. It was all under the surface. So the reason I bring this up is some of you might be bumping up against that pattern in yourself right now of being a caretaker. And how overwhelming it can be when you're watching many aspects of the world and people that you know and are connected to in the world, and even people that you don't know but that you feel for. It's overwhelming when you start to see people going through difficult or painful, transformations, people going through suffering you wish they weren't going through, that can cause a huge healing response in your pattern, your role, the part of you that used to think there were certain things you could do to save people or uplift people. And it's interesting, there was a question that was chosen for today that talks a little bit about that. But the reason I have to bring this up is this is part of the paradigm shift that we're going through, because on a human level, like many of you, I can look at some of the things going on in the world and be horrified or shocked or wish it was different. But then I also recognize that my own patterning, my own conditioning, my own way of being is being challenged to grow and change, and that's its own level of discomfort, because we can't necessarily save everybody in the world that we might want to. And some of you might go, well, Lee, I'm over that. I haven't had that pattern for a long time. And I'm like, well, that's great. But why I'm bringing this up, they were telling me to. There are subtle energies in the world right now that we don't recognize. We've never lived through a time in history, certainly not in this lifetime anyway, where we're seeing the emotional temperature of the world be, I'll call it unstable. What it's actually doing is it's destabilizing from where it was being held. So we're all held in place by some of our rules and regulations as a society, some of our cultural ways of interacting. We're held in place by those systems, and they're all wobbling a little bit right now. And that not only makes us feel a little bit nervous, but it also might make everyone around you feel off-center in a way that they can't necessarily put their finger on. So that level of rising emotion in the collective around us is the reason I'm talking to you about overwhelm today. Sure, we all have to clean up our own side of the street. And I don't know about you, when I get overwhelmed, I now feel the signals. I feel, oh, you're reaching your limit. And I start to adjust things. I adjust what I can. I up my self-care. I look at what might be negotiable in the next week. Some things I can't change, but there might be one or two things I can just adjust to give me a bit more space so that I don't feel like there are more things going on at once than I'm capable of keeping my center in. But the reason I'm bringing this up with you is the more hidden aspect of the overwhelm right now, which is the energy field of the world is very different, even from 2 years ago. And we're feeling that and we're noticing that whether we are or not. And if you just look at how difficult the last 2 years have been for the world as a whole, even if you yourself had major breakthroughs or epiphanies or have had a relatively good time in the last 2 years, which again is great, never ever talk yourself out of having a good day, because there's always going to be something that might come along to invite you to lower your vibration. So if you're in a high vibrational space, stay there as long as you can, because it helps everybody else when you're in that space, because you're generating that energy. But the reason I bring this up is there is a kind of hidden aspect to what the collective are going through, and it is affecting us. And so I believe, because the Z's wanted me to talk about this, they may elaborate on that a little bit in the message that we will close today with. But I want you to think about that the reason some of you might be surprised at your overwhelm right now, because you're searching inside yourself going, well, actually, I'm kind of okay, and relatively, I've got certain things in place, and I can be grateful for those things. You can be grateful 1 hour of the day and be happy the next hour of the day, and the third hour of the day, you might be overwhelmed. And part of it is adjusting to the energy of these times. So this is why the self-care practices that we talk about, that you yourself have to figure out what's working for you, are so important. For me, they are spaces to process. They are spaces to allow the feelings that are moving through my system, or the thoughts, or the state of my nervous system, to regulate, calm, and still again. It can look like meditation, yoga, some of the more traditional things we hear about that are out there in the world. It can look like putting on a Black Sabbath record and turning it up really loud and dancing around your house. I think we sometimes get very fixed ideas about spiritual ways of doing things, and the truth is everything's spiritual. If you're alive in a human body, you're having a spiritual experience, and we know that we can have high spiritual experiences and perhaps lower experiences that teach us lessons or that come with a slightly lower vibe undertone, but they're still spiritual experiences. So one of the things that I think can often confuse us about the idea of self-care is, well, am I doing it right? And, well, my friend does yoga, but I don't like yoga, it doesn't really work for me. Really, self-care is just about time. Are you giving yourself time to do the things that decompress you, light you up? And if you're responsible for someone, whether it's a child or you're a carer, is there a way that you can include something in that responsibility that lightens or brightens you up a little bit? So even if time is hard to come by for some of you, what can you do when you're in that relationship that will help keep you afloat and that will keep you uplifted? So for me, self-care is really about just designating some time to what's going on in here without necessarily adding more to what's going on in here. Adding more stimulation, more communication, more relationships, more doings, more. It's just about taking a moment to still. So I wanted to expand a little on overwhelm, and this is just something to bear in mind. It's not something we have to be in fear of, but I do think that as we go through these times, just reminding yourself, oh yeah, the collective energy field of the world is spiking like crazy on some days for all kinds of reasons. And so as a sensitive, the reason that I can't figure out why my normal 10-minute yoga practice didn't work for me today, try something else, try something different. As the ocean changes, we have to change the way we swim. And the ocean is really changing a lot at the moment, and it's going to keep moving. And I've seen many questions from you, specifically for the Z's, saying, when is this period going to be over? When do we get some relief? And the most important thing to understand about that kind of question, I believe, is, well, who do we have to become in order to experience relief in these times? And how do we have to play it differently? I'm saying all of this not because I want to give you another to-do or encourage you to sit and write a list of all the things that you can do, although that might be helpful if you're that kind of mind that it would help you to write a quick list of a few things that you could do for self-care. Perhaps you're like, yeah, I can never think of it. Always good to write a few things, but I'm more just putting this out there because the energy field right now is very electrical, and you might be noticing how you're ricocheting off others in the world, either that you know, or stories that you're hearing from others, or things playing out on the public stage, the world stage. Bear in mind the nervous system of the world right now is more activated than ever before. So your self-care for your sensitive self is going to look a little different, is going to need you a little bit more, and you'll also be noticing that some of your old patterns of coping, changing the energy in a room or a relationship, they aren't working as well as they were. And that's okay because you've developed more resilience internally. Hello, I'm Lee. I'm an intuitive, a channeler, and for the last 18 years, I have been guiding people with their energy and their spirituality. I have been a lifelong student of boundaries, and I think most of us are. Boundaries used to mean to me putting a line between me and someone else or saying no. But the other side of boundaries is that it actually increases our connection. In my masterclass on boundaries, we're going to take a full 360 look at boundaries. When you sign up for the class, you will immediately receive a full channeled recording called Boundaries and Connection. I'm choosing to deliver boundaries live, and then you will have lifetime access to all of the material. Hope you can join me. All dates and links to the course are below. take good care and take good care of your boundaries.